Well, that's a review of the economy in 2021. Now let's look at the sectors. Let's start with agriculture. The sector recorded a 1.7 trillion naira trade deficit between January and September, as exports stood at 371.8 billion naira, while imports rose to 2.1 trillion naira. This implies that Nigeria is still highly import dependent when it comes to agricultural produce. Now, how does this impact our strategy on food security? We have Mr. Banjoko Omotunde, an agricultural specialist and the managing director of Banjoko Omotunde Farms Limited, joining us for this conversation. Good to speak to you, Mr. Banjoko. Thank you so much, and compliments of the season.
Same to you.
Happy holidays. So let's look at the year 2021 and see the agricultural sector. How did we do? How good? How bad? How?
It's really a challenging year, I must admit, and it's a mixed feeling for those of us in this sector, and we didn't do too well. I must admit that the starting point, we didn't do too well because we looking at all the numbers, none was kind of encouraging. And, you know, we look at a sector that contributes about 26% to GDP, employs 70%, and the contribution to that industry has been really, really low. You know, when you look at, from February this year, 2021, the price of virtually every product went up by 26%. And that's, you know, now not talking...
Are you talking of food crops?
Food crops, largely, because, you know, when we talk agriculture, is the food crops that really drives the food inflation rate, you know, food crops, livestock, fishery, forestry.
Exactly, because I mean, sometimes we forget that there's animal husbandry and all that as part of
those four buckets, but crop, livestock, fishery, and forestry, but the crop aspect drives the numbers very high. So when we are not doing well with those numbers, then other factors, other sectors, and these are not just numbers, these are things that people can feel in the market. Not just data, not statistics, not economic figures. We are talking about when you go to the market, because that's really the benchmark. It's not the data we pull out, is the benchmark, is what people feel when they go to the market. Not the
inflation figures that we see.
Yes, we say inflation figure is 17%, 16%. We can relate with it a little, but what an average Nigerian is more interested in, how much did I buy this thing last year? How much is it being sold for now? And when you look at it from January, especially February, things started going far high.
What are the drivers of this?
The drivers, to me, what happened in 2021 is summary of what has been happening over the years. But some other factors now triggered it though. But when we look at our investment into agriculture, you know, there was this Maputo declaration in 2003 that every nation should do 10% of their budget into agriculture, which Nigeria also signed in 2004. But when we look at our budget, since that time till now, we've always been doing 1.3%, 1.4%. I think President Yar'Adua tried, he did 5%, 2008, 2009. 2021, we did 1.37%. And when you do that, 280 billion into a sector that we expect so much from, isn't going to do much. And when you now even look at the breakdown of the 280 billion, it's alarming how much is going into each of these sectors that directly affects the food security issue.
Or should we be waiting for the public sector on this? This is business. We have private sector. Apart from what we have a lot of interventions by the CBN, the Anchor Borrowers Program, and some other funds.
Yes, we do. We have a lot of those interventions, well mapped out on paper, but poorly executed. So that
would you say? I mean, the Anchor Borrowers Program, for instance, seems to be helping. I think the last count, they say it's helped about over 4 million smallholder farms.
We are not talking about the figures being put out there. We are talking about what really is going on. I've been part of most of those projects, and I can tell you the implementation has not been. My advice in that regard is government can bring out this policy, but it should be driven by the private sector. If it is done, because government has the resources, largely, to do this, but the driving of it can only be achieved for us to have that direct impact by the private sector. The private sector are more in tuned. They know what to do, because that's what we do our benchmark with. As a private sector, for example, I'm in business to make profit while I'm also providing service. But for an average person in the public sector, They do the exams every 3 years. They are not moved by the overall implication of what some of these projects do at the end of the day.
But isn't the challenge why perhaps it seems the government is getting too involved in this, because the private sector is just there to make profits, and these programs are supposed to help those, you know, who are low there to come up. So if you leave it in the hands of the private sector, then it will just be
I think
profit-driven.
it should be a private sector, public sector driven project, not 100% public, not 100% private. And when we look at some of these, I mean, they've done well in some states, fair enough. But in some of those states, we were even applauding the government for some of these projects. We realized, seeing on paper again, that some of them are even unable to pay the loans they got to do the project. So eventually, can we say it's been successful? We've been in some of this meeting and we've told the government that the policies are good, but they can be reviewed for more impact. So 2021 really has been a challenging year. And like I said, it's summary of what has been happening in years. One is the finance aspect. The other one we should also talk about that I have been so much worried about, we look at even the flooding. In most, this year, for example, about 27, 28 states being affected by flood. And these are, the flood affected the food basket of the nation. We have flood happening in most of the northeast state, northwest state, and a part of the south state. So when you have this situation going on, it's just normal that we'll be where we are. But really, so many things have been going on that we now need to start paying attention to them if we want to reverse the trend of what we are currently experiencing as a nation.
Exactly, because we're going into a new year now. It's just a couple of days.
We are going into the new year.
So what steps, you talked about the issue of being real, the reality and not just the figures.
Not just the figures. So when we are talking about reversing the trend, you look at the 2022 budget, for example, you look at the breakdown. If some of the projects that have been highlighted in the budget will be implemented, as at when due, we'll start seeing a change. For example, NADA has been revived in 2021. It's an arm of the government under the presidency. And the 2021, they got 11 billion to start some new projects, revive some of our water harvesting structure, food reserve base, to work on stuff like that, to set up a scheme for the youth. If some of those projects are being implemented, then we'll start seeing a reverse in what we're currently experiencing. And of course, when we look at the number that has been displaced by insecurity also, it's a major concern. And when we also look at the impact of the finance structure we have for agriculture, we go to seminars, we do webinars, we do all that. And when we look at the number of people who shut down their farms in 2021, some of us are very worried.
What made them shut down the farms?
Some of those reasons: one, flood; some, the funding structures we have.
What's wrong with this funding structure, and how can we put it right?
The funding structure we currently run, it will be difficult for you to survive on a loan of 29–30%. You need, and BOI, that's why I said if they go by the budget for 2022, the government plans to recapitalize BOI, Bank of Agriculture, in 2022, recapitalize NIC in 2022, support some other government agency. If they're able to recapitalize these banks, then we'll have a reversing trend. Why did I say that? Because, for example, you need a single-digit loan to be able to fund agriculture. You need a long tenor loan, not a loan of 30% in 12 months, when my goods are even still on the field. And even...
But the Bank of Agriculture should be structured.
It's not functioning at the moment.
Yes, I know that. But it should be structured. We hear a lot about the Bank of Industry, how they're being impactful in the industry and all that. But for the Bank of Agriculture...
They've been dormant for years.
Yeah, because people are not paying back loans or...
I'm not sure, like you rightly mentioned, how is Bank of Industry doing it? So then, Bank of Agriculture should follow the same route.
Or is it that they didn't get the specialists? you know, people who understand, because I know when you talk about funding in agriculture,
Sure.
it's something that you need to have knowledge in. You need to be knowledgeable
About it.
Yes.
I think you only need to work closely with, I know how BOI runs their stuffs. BOI is run, even though it's a government agency, they give the loan at single digits. They work with you as a manufacturer, as a processor. They work with you. They don't just disburse
They help you
loans.
do your papers.
So they help
until
with your
you get
papers.
The loan, ensure that
you get the loan. They still keep working with you.
True.
So they are actually after you doing the work. So not just, funding. If you are providing the fund, one, it has to be a single digit. Then you have to work with the farmers on realistic projects. And then you are working with them to see the end product, and they are willing to also scale at the pace you are willing to fund them. So if we are willing to fund these farmers, you did 5 hectares this year, you've been able to, okay, we can see the trend, you've supplied, then we'll give you more funds. We'll look at where are you supplying this product. So those are some of the things Bank of Industry does.
So let's, because we're almost out of time now, let's also look at it from the private sector.
Yeah.
Agriculture is a business.
It's a business.
So people ought to be interested in going into it, and they can make money. For instance, I've been to like a southern part of Kaduna, and I know a crop like ginger.
Yeah.
It's just there. You know,
wasting away.
Yes, it is waste. And I'm thinking, isn't it possible for one rich individual to go to that area, set up a factory, get close to the raw material, get the raw material, and you have a lot of young people who go there.
Willing to work.
Yes, and they get it little by little and just sell it in bits.
You create employment.
Exactly. Is it not possible? Is there something stopping us from doing that?
It's possible. If you look at maybe the funds that came into agriculture in 2018, for example, I think about $290 million. In 2019, about $490 million. And in 2020, I think about 400 million came into agriculture. 2021, maybe roughly for now, maybe over a bit above $200 million. We'll know the final figure at the end of the year. But the funds that came into agriculture this year have been greatly reduced. When we look at some of the platforms through which we get money into the industry, most of them had issues. We are not well prepared. Some of them, were not well structured. And the funds that came in this year were not well managed, and there was reduction. So then secondly is the fact that most of the people that have the funds, agriculture is a long-term thing.
Yeah.
So most people that have the funds, like you rightly mentioned, they are looking at return in maybe a year or two. But if you are really coming into agriculture, you must not just for the money. Even though I said it's a business, but it's not just for the money that you want 60%, because we talked to some investors, they want 60% in a year. So when you have such investors coming into agriculture, it's going to be a lot of issues. So we should be talking about investors who are willing to wait for some time.
Mr. Banjoka, I think you have a lot of work to do. You are in this agricultural sector. Please convince people that it's a long-term business that is sure to bring profit. It's a win-win for everyone at the end. It might take time, but it's a win-win for everyone.
Yes, it is.
Create employment. We maximize our potentials as Nigeria. Every state in Nigeria
has... Even the insecurity we are having, it's part of it.
It's part of,
because unemployment everywhere.
You know, so it's a win-win at the end of the day.
The brain drain we are having is part of it. So,
and then you make your money.
No, really, it's an interesting field. Some of us have been encouraging a lot of people to come into the industry.
All right, we're sorry, we really need to go now.
Thank you very much.
Director. Thank you so much, Mr. Banjoka, for joining us on this conversation. But we'll be watching you to ensure that you practice this. So we'll just take a break now. And after the break, we'll delve into another sector. And this sector affects even you, affects every other sector. Find out what it is and what we will talk about it in a short while. This is Business Morning on Channels Television.